But a lot of people in the venture business have told me to shut up about what I do, and I won't do it. And I think, you know, that it's been an advantage for me. So I'll just leave it at that. If you can create a conversation, whether it's a conversation between entrepreneurs who are starting companies by sharing information and talking about what you're doing, or if you can create a conversation between investors, or a conversation between investors and entrepreneurs, that conversation is very rich. The specific, you know, but if you think about it in its totality, not a specific blog post and 100 comments to it, like that might be valuable, it might not be valuable. But if you can run a running conversation 365 days a year for 10 years with, you know, tens of thousands of entrepreneurs, I'm telling you that it is the richest source of insight you could possibly ever imagine. And, you know, this came to me as an accident. I didn't intend it to be this way, and it just happened, and I think it's an enormous advantage. So I was a late bloomer. I wrote a blog post about this called "I Got Lucky." I think that's what the title of it was. I was a late bloomer. You know, I wasn't slacker. I went to MIT and spent 2 years writing software, and I went to business school. And while I was in business school, I learned about the venture capital business, and I decided I would go get a job in the venture capital business. And I went and got a job in the venture capital business. So all of that actually is a pretty accomplished set of things that I did before I was 25. But when I got into the venture capital business, I didn't know what to invest in. I didn't have any theses about where the technology business was going. And I worked for a couple of guys, Milton and Bliss, who, you know, I owe a lot to. I like to describe them as the two older partners in the movie Trading Places. They didn't swap me out for, you know, somebody else or anything like that. But, you know, that's kind of where they were in their careers, and that's kind of the generation they were.
Sort of old money, like just sitting back, fat chairs.
No, well, you know, they were reasonably self-made guys, but they, you know, they were in their late 50s, early 60s, and I basically went through an apprenticeship type model, carrying, you know, effectively carrying their bags to board meetings and such, and I learned a lot from them. We didn't make a lot of money. We weren't a great venture capital firm, really. And then the internet came along about 8 years in, so about 33, and I guess I had just, you know, developed enough expertise in watching these guys and learning and such that when the internet came along, I was ready. And that's when I said, this is going to be big, this is my moment, and I got to do something. I quit their firm. That's how I paid them back for all that mentorship. And I started a venture capital firm with Jerry Colonna and called Flatiron Partners. And then, you know, we did a lot of things right, but we did a lot of things wrong. I kind of think of that as my first startup. And we made a lot of money, but we really made a lot of bad decisions. And I learned a lot from those decisions. I paid for a lot of those bad decisions. I learned a lot from those decisions. And then my second startup would be Union Square Ventures, and I think we got a lot right the second time. So, you know, I guess, you know, to kind of summarize it, did an apprenticeship, then I did my first startup, which was a mixed bag, and then, you know, I guess did it right the second time. So there's a guy who comments on my blog who's probably a 60-year-old CEO in Austin, Texas. He goes by the name of JLM, and he is awesome. I've met him a few times. And he's truly incredible. And you know, he sort of called me out in the comments, and he said, when you present, know your audience. And you know, what he was kind of saying was, what you're really saying, Fred, is when you come present to you, do this. You know, and I said, you're right. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, this probably isn't great advice if you're going to present to a VC who really wants to see 25 slides. But when you're coming to present to me, this is what I want. And so at a minimum, you know, what I'm trying to do with my blog is to let people know about what I care about. So when you walk into, first of all, you know even whether to bother walking into my office. And if you do walk into my office, you have a good idea of what I want. And I also, so that's at a minimum. The other thing is, I also believe that that is better for the entrepreneur and better for the VC. And so I'm trying to evangelize in some ways to tell the industry you should act this way. But, that's, who is it for me to do that, right? Well, I guess I feel like I can do that, but there's plenty of people in the venture industry who don't want to work that way, and if you know that they're not like that, then don't go in and do that, right? Because it's not going to work out very well. There's one other thing you asked, which is, the whole thing about quit when you're 18 and do a startup, or kind of do what I did, which is do some apprenticeship, do a startup. I think some of it is if you have that great idea and you just can't put it down, then I think you should just do the startup, right? Like, forget about the apprenticeship and all that kind of stuff. And if you're David Karp and you're 20 years old and all of a sudden you're like, gee, I can create this product and nobody else has created anything like it, and I know exactly how to build it and I can't wait to build it, then do it. But if you're doing a startup because you want to do a startup, but you don't know what to do, then I wouldn't necessarily recommend quitting high school to do that. I think then, it might be better to, kind of go along a little bit more conventional approach. We do not have a strategy of, we want to, go invest in companies coming out of Y Combinator or Techstars or whatever. We only want to invest in companies that we want to invest in, and so that it's not like I don't want to hire somebody because they went to Harvard either, right? The pedigree part of it doesn't mean anything to me, but it does mean a lot to a lot of people. I mean, look, Ron Conway and Yuri Milner created the Start Fund. They're literally giving money to every single company coming out of Y Combinator. So there's certainly people out there who still want to hire people who graduate from Harvard. I'm not one of them. I think that the thing that these programs do, whether it's Paul Graham and the mentorship that he provides at Y Combinator, or the mentorship system that they created at Techstars, Seed Camp is another great program in Europe that I've done a lot of work with. I spent some time with Dream It this summer, Seed Start, the FinTech program that NICEF did. There's so many good programs here in New York, and I think that they are hugely impactful because there's a lot of people who are still trying to figure out how to become an entrepreneur, and they need some mentorship, they need some coaching, they need some polishing. The idea needs some tweaking, and these programs do that. So I'm a big fan of them. The last thing I'll say, though, is that the great entrepreneurs, for the most part, don't do those programs. We've invested out of these programs, and we will continue to invest out of these programs. So we don't see it as a negative either. But I'm just saying that there's a lot of people who don't need it. I have an opinion about this, but I haven't fully baked it or fully formed it yet. And I got to be careful because I don't want to say anything I'm going to regret. But I think that Clayton Christensen said it best when he said that most truly disruptive things are originally perceived as toys. And I think that there's some of that going on in Peter's criticism. I don't think that he truly is seeing the disruptive ideas for what they are, because he's got his head wrapped around something else, and so that's my opinion on that. One could call David Karp a designer. And designers who can code, right? Can write some JavaScript and maybe muddle around a little bit with the rest of the system. Yeah, those people are awesome founders. Dennis Crowley tells a story. So he and Naveen built the first version of Foursquare, and the minute that they knew they were going to get money from us and OATV in the first round, they hired Harry, who now runs engineering at Foursquare. And I said, well, that's great, what are you going to do with Harry? He said, Harry's going to rewrite every line of code that I wrote, because I'm the worst coder. But Dennis is a good product guy, and he's got a good design aesthetic. I wouldn't call him a designer, but you know, he wrote a big part of that first app, and he knew it wasn't going to scale. He knew it was all spaghetti, and it was horrible. So yeah, I like those people, you know, that are visually oriented. They know what the product needs to be. If they're not technical at all, I worry a little bit. But if they know enough to kind of be dangerous, kind of like that style. I think it is incumbent upon Facebook and Twitter to improve their systems so that users can start managing some of that problem. I mean, Facebook launched something today called Subscribe, which is kind of like the Twitter follow button. And that's a way for you to start to tell them, give them more, give you more control over what you want to see and what you don't want to see in your news feed. And I know a bunch of things Twitter's working on. I can't really talk about them in any specifics, but I can tell you that is the #1 product priority that Twitter has as well. So it's a good news, bad thing. Good news, bad news thing. More people coming into these systems, more data is being put in these systems. They're getting more crowded. But Clay Shirky, I think, had the ultimate line about this. There's no such thing as information overload. It's called filter failure. And so both of these companies have to solve the filter failure.
So my final question to you is, you just had your birthday.
Right.
You raised money for a very good cause.
Right.
How much did you end up raising?
Last time I counted, it was about $55,000, which is a lot of money, right? It's probably more than most people in this country make in a year. And so I'm really grateful for everybody. There's something like 370 people who contributed. Probably some people in this room, so thank you. And I got sucked into Donors Choose because Charles Best, who is an entrepreneur, and he runs a nonprofit, but he's as good of an entrepreneur as I've ever seen. Convinced me 1 month to do this bloggers challenge, and I was competing against Scoble and Arrington and all these people. So I was like, and I beat them all, and we raised like $30,000 just 4 years ago, and I was really inspired by the idea of a lightweight web service that can sit on top of a community and basically channel the energy of the community into some collective action. In this case, it was raising money for teachers so they could buy stuff for their classrooms. And there's one other thing about Donors Choose that I love, which is it's a for-profit nonprofit, meaning it's a nonprofit. They're not in business to make money, but they never run an annual fundraising campaign. They never raise money because their business model is no different than eBay's business model or Etsy's business model. They take a small piece of every transaction, and that transaction fee is enough to sustain and grow the entire company. So they did one raise, which I participated in, just like a venture raise, and Charles said, with this money, I will get to profitability, and he did. And now that company continues to grow and develop just like a for-profit company would. And so I'm inspired by Charles, his vision, his business model, and the power of what things like Donors Choose and Kiva and many other things like it can do on the web. And so that's why I wanted to celebrate my 50th birthday that way.
Well, thank you for giving back there, and thank you for giving back here.